I heard my son say, "The 2 millions is ours. She's too old to change anything." So I revoked the will and gave it all to his wife's hated half-brother. The day after the funeral, he went to claim his fortune. The manager told him the balance was zero. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Lillian, and I'm 66 years old. 3 months ago, I buried my husband Harold after 43 years of marriage. People tell me I'm handling his death well, but the truth is, I'm drowning in silence. The house feels too big, too quiet, and my son Ronan's visits have become more frequent lately. I thought it was because he cared about how I was coping. I was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon when my world shifted. I had just returned from Dr. Peterson's office where we'd discussed my blood pressure medication. Nothing serious, just routine adjustments that come with age. The October wind was particularly sharp that day, and I was grateful to step into the warmth of my home. I heard voices coming from the back garden, Ronan's deep laugh mixed with Milena's higher-pitched giggle. My heart warmed slightly. It had been weeks since I'd heard genuine laughter in this house. I decided to make them some coffee, maybe join them outside despite the chill. As I moved toward the kitchen, their voices became clearer through the open patio door. I paused, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like an intimate conversation between husband and wife. $2 million, Ronan. $2 million. Milena's voice carried excitement, the kind you hear when someone's discussing vacation plans or a new car. My hand froze on the coffee tin. They were talking about money, about my money. I know, baby. I've been thinking about it constantly since the lawyer called last week. Ronan's voice was lower now, more serious. Mom doesn't understand how much we're struggling with the mortgage and Emma's college fund. I pressed myself against the kitchen wall, my heart beginning to race. What lawyer? What call? I hadn't spoken to any attorney recently. "She's too old to change anything now anyway," Milena continued, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice. "I mean, look at her. She can barely remember to take her pills on time. Dr. Peterson probably told her something concerning today, too, judging by how long she was gone." My chest tightened. I'd been gone longer because I'd stopped at the pharmacy and then visited Harold's grave. But clearly, they'd been watching, timing my absence, discussing me like I was already dead. "The inheritance is basically ours at this point," Ronan said, and his words hit me like a physical blow. "She's lived her life. This money could actually do some good now, help Emma get into that private school, let us finally renovate the kitchen. They were planning my legacy while I stood breathing in my own home. Your mother always acts like she's going to live forever," Milena laughed, but it wasn't warm, it was calculating. "She's 66, Ronan. The statistics aren't in her favor, especially with her blood pressure issues." I gripped the counter to steady myself. Blood pressure issues? I'd never mentioned my medical concerns to either of them. How did they know about my recent doctor visits? "I almost feel bad sometimes." Ronan's voice carried a hint of something that might have been guilt, but it passed quickly. "But then I remember how she's just sitting on all that money, not doing anything meaningful with it. At least we'd put it to good use." The coffee tin slipped from my hands, clattering to the floor. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. I held my breath, listening. "What was that?" Milena's voice was sharp now. "Probably just the cat," Ronan replied dismissively. We hadn't had a cat in 15 years. I quickly bent to retrieve the coffee tin, my hands shaking so violently I could barely grip it properly. My knees protested as I straightened up, a reminder of the age they were so casually discussing. "We should probably go back inside," Milena said. "Make sure she's okay. Keep up appearances. Keep up appearances." The phrase echoed in my mind as I heard their footsteps approaching the back door. I rushed to the living room, settling into Harold's old recliner and grabbing a magazine from the side table. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I was sure they'd hear it. "Hi, Mom." Ronan's voice was bright, cheerful, as he entered the room. "How was your doctor's appointment?" I looked up at my son, this man I'd given birth to, nursed through childhood illnesses, supported through college, and celebrated when he met Milena. His smile was perfect, practiced. The same smile he'd given me every visit for the past 3 months. "Oh, it was fine, sweetheart. Just routine." The words felt strange in my mouth, like speaking a foreign language. Milena appeared beside him, her arm linked through his. She was 34, 12 years younger than Ronan, with the kind of polished beauty that required daily maintenance. Her smile was just as false as her husband's. "That's wonderful, Lillian. We were just admiring your beautiful garden. The roses are still blooming so late in the season." I nodded, not trusting my voice. They stood there like the perfect couple, concerned and loving, asking about my health, my day, my plans for dinner. All while the words I'd overheard burned in my mind like acid. After they left, promising to visit again soon, I sat in Harold's chair until darkness fell around me. The house felt different now, like a stage where everyone knew their lines except me. I thought about the $2 million they'd discussed so casually. Harold's life insurance policy, our savings, the investments we'd carefully built over 4 decades of marriage, money I'd planned to leave to Ronan because he was my only child, money I'd imagined would help him feel secure, maybe allow him to take that vacation to Europe he'd always talked about, or help with Emma's education. But they weren't waiting for my generous gift. They were waiting for my death. I pulled Harold's old phone book from the drawer beside his chair and found the number for Morrison & Associates, the law firm that had handled our will years ago. It was nearly 8 o'clock, but I left a message anyway. "This is Lillian Crawford. I need to make some changes to my will. Significant changes. Please call me first thing tomorrow morning." As I hung up the phone, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Harold's funeral. Purpose. For 3 months, I'd been drifting through my days like a ghost in my own life. But my son's words had awakened something fierce inside me. If Ronan thought I was too old to change anything, he was about to discover just how wrong he could be. The house was quiet again, but this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt full of possibility. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Ronan's voice saying, "She's too old to change anything now." By 5 in the morning, I gave up trying and made coffee in the kitchen where I'd overheard their conversation. The patio door was closed now, but I could still feel the chill of their words in the air. Morrison & Associates called at exactly 9 o'clock. Margaret Morrison herself was on the line, her voice professional but warm. "Mrs. Crawford, I was sorry to hear about Harold's passing. How can we help you today?" "I need to make changes to my will, Margaret. Complete changes." There was a pause. "Of course. Would you like to schedule an appointment to discuss the details?" "Today, if possible. This is urgent." Something in my tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because she cleared her schedule for 2 o'clock that afternoon. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with Harold's old ledger and began tallying our assets. The life insurance policy alone was worth $1,200,000. Our savings account held another $400,000. The house, if sold in today's market, would bring at least $350,000. Harold's investment portfolio, which I'd barely looked at since his death, showed another $200,000 in various stocks and bonds. $2,150,000, almost exactly what I'd heard Ronan discussing. The realization hit me like ice water. He'd already calculated everything. This wasn't casual speculation about inheritance. This was detailed financial planning. I walked to Harold's study, a room I'd avoided since the funeral. His desk was exactly as he'd left it, papers still scattered with his handwriting, his reading glasses folded beside his favorite pen. But now I noticed something I'd missed before. The desk drawer was slightly open, something Harold never would have allowed. Inside, I found our important documents folder. The papers were organized differently than Harold's usual meticulous system. Someone had been through these files, and recently. My medical records were missing. I called Dr. Peterson's office immediately. After being transferred twice, I finally spoke to his nurse, Sandra. "Mrs. Crawford, yes, we did receive a request for your records. Your son called last week saying you'd asked him to pick them up for insurance purposes." My hands trembled as I gripped the phone. "I never asked him to do that." Sandra's voice became uncertain. "Oh, I'm so sorry. He seemed to know all the details about your recent visits, and with your husband's passing, we assumed. What exactly did you give him? Just the basic information about your blood pressure monitoring and the new medication dosages. Nothing too detailed, but... She trailed off, clearly realizing she'd made a mistake. I thanked Sandra and hung up, my mind racing. Ronan had my medical records. He'd been monitoring my health, probably looking for signs that my condition was worse than it appeared. They weren't just waiting for me to die naturally, they were actively tracking my decline. The doorbell rang, interrupting my dark thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Emma, Ronan's 20-year-old daughter from his first marriage. My granddaughter stood on the porch holding a small potted plant, her face carrying that same uncertain expression she'd worn as a child whenever her parents were fighting. "Grandma Lillian, I brought you something for your windowsill." Emma was the one bright spot in my relationship with Ronan's family. Unlike Milena, who'd never warmed to me, Emma had always been genuinely affectionate. She'd spent summers here when she was younger, helping me in the garden and listening to my stories about her grandfather. "Come in, sweetheart. This is a lovely surprise." As Emma arranged the small succulent on my kitchen windowsill, I studied her face. She looked tired, stressed in a way that seemed too heavy for a college student. "How are your classes going?" I asked. "They're fine, I guess." Emma's voice was flat. "Dad's been asking me a lot of questions about them lately, about costs and stuff." My chest tightened. "What kind of questions?" Emma shrugged, but I could see the discomfort in her posture. "He keeps talking about this private school he wants me to transfer to. Says he'll have money soon to pay for it. But Grandma, I like where I am. I don't want to switch schools just because it's more expensive." The pieces clicked together with awful clarity. Ronan was already spending my inheritance money in his mind. Emma's education was part of their financial planning. "Has your father mentioned anything about my health lately?" I asked carefully. Emma's eyes widened slightly. He said you've been having some problems with your blood pressure. He told me I should visit more often because..." She stopped, her cheeks reddening. "Because what, honey?" "Because you might not have much time left." The words came out in a rush, and Emma immediately looked stricken. "But that's not why I'm visiting. I come because I love you, Grandma. You seem fine to me." I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I know you do, sweetheart. And for what it's worth, I feel fine too." After Emma left, promising to visit again soon, I called Ronan's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that same artificially cheerful tone I'd heard yesterday. "Mom, how are you feeling today?" "I'm fine, Ronan. I was wondering if you could come by this evening. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you." "Of course. Milena and I were just talking about how we should spend more time together. This is perfect timing." I almost laughed at his enthusiasm. If only he knew what I wanted to discuss. They arrived at 7 o'clock sharp, Milena carrying a bouquet of flowers that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She kissed my cheek with practiced warmth while Ronan embraced me, holding on just a moment longer than usual. "You look wonderful, Mom," he said, studying my face intently. "Color in your cheeks, bright eyes. The new medication must be working well." I nodded, watching his expression carefully. "Dr. Peterson is very pleased with my progress. In fact, he said I'm in excellent shape for someone my age. He expects I'll live many more years." Something flickered across Ronan's face. Disappointment, maybe, or frustration. It was gone so quickly I might have imagined it, but I knew I hadn't. "That's fantastic news," Milena said, but her smile seemed forced. "We're so relieved." We sat in the living room, making small talk about Emma's classes and the weather, but I was studying them now with new eyes, watching for the signs I'd missed before, the way Ronan's gaze lingered on Harold's expensive watch collection displayed in the cabinet, how Milena's fingers traced the arm of the antique sofa we'd bought on our anniversary trip to Charleston. They weren't just visiting their aging mother-in-law, they were cataloging their future possessions. "I've been thinking about the future quite a bit lately," I said during a lull in conversation. "About what Harold would have wanted, about making sure everything is handled properly." Ronan leaned forward, his attention suddenly focused. That's smart thinking, Mom. Have you given any thought to updating your will? With Dad gone, things might need to be adjusted. There it was. He couldn't help himself. Actually, I have an appointment with the lawyers tomorrow, just to review everything, make sure it's all in order. That's very responsible, Milena said, but I caught the quick glance she exchanged with Ronan. If you need any help understanding the legal language, Ronan could come with you. I smiled sweetly. That's thoughtful, but I think I can manage. After all, I'm not too old to understand my own financial affairs. The words hung in the air. Ronan's face went slightly pale, and I wondered if he remembered saying those exact words yesterday. After they left, I sat in Harold's chair again, but this time I wasn't drowning in grief. I was planning. Tomorrow's appointment with Margaret Morrison would be just the beginning. If my son thought he could manipulate me, monitor my health, and plan my death like a business transaction, he had severely underestimated the woman who had raised him. Harold always said I was stronger than I looked. Tomorrow, Ronan would discover exactly how strong I could be. Margaret Morrison's office hadn't changed in 15 years. The same mahogany desk, the same wall of law books, even the same coffee-stained coaster where Harold used to set his cup during our meetings. But today, I wasn't the grieving widow who'd sat here 3 months ago. Today, I was a woman with a mission. Lillian, I have to ask, Margaret said after I'd explained what I wanted to do. Are you certain about this? Completely disinheriting Ronan is a significant decision. Have you considered a reduced inheritance instead? I thought about my son's voice discussing my death like a business opportunity. I'm absolutely certain. Very well. Do you have a specific beneficiary in mind? That was the question I'd been wrestling with all morning. I couldn't just give $2 million to charity. That felt too impersonal, too easy. I wanted my decision to mean something, to teach Ronan a lesson he'd never forget. I need some time to consider my options. Can you draft the basic framework while I decide? Margaret nodded, making notes. Of course, but Lillian, whoever you choose should be someone you trust completely. This is a life-changing amount of money. After leaving the law office, I drove aimlessly through town, my mind spinning. I needed to find the perfect recipient, someone whose inheritance would devastate Ronan not just financially, but emotionally. I was stopped at a red light when I noticed the man crossing the street in front of my car. He was tall, maybe 40 years old, wearing scrubs and a tired expression that reminded me of Harold after his long shifts at the hospital. Something about him looked familiar. Then it hit me. The jawline, the way he carried himself. He looked remarkably like Milena. I followed him on impulse, staying far enough back to avoid suspicion. He entered Mercy General Hospital through the employee entrance. When I approached the information desk, the volunteer was happy to help. "Oh, you must mean Derek Vasquez," she said when I described the man I'd seen. "He's one of our best nurses in the cardiac unit." "Are you family?" Derek Vasquez. The surname was different, but the resemblance was unmistakable. "I'm not sure," I said carefully. "Does he have family in the area?" "I believe he has a sister, but they're not close. Such a shame. Derek's one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. He stayed extra hours last week to sit with an elderly patient who had no visitors." My heart began racing. A sister they weren't close to. Could this be Milena's family connection she'd never mentioned? That evening, I did something I hadn't done in decades. I called Milena's mother, Rosa, whose number I'd kept from our Christmas card exchanges over the years. "Lillian, what a surprise." Rosa's voice was warm but puzzled. "How are you holding up, dear?" After the usual pleasantries about Harold's death, I steered the conversation toward family. "I've been thinking about how important family connections are. Milena is so lucky to have siblings to lean on." Rosa's pause was telling. "Well, she has Derek, but—" She trailed off. "Derek? My son from my first marriage. He and Milena have never gotten along, I'm afraid. Derek has always been too. Principled for Milena's taste." I pressed gently. "Oh? I don't think she's ever mentioned him." "I'm not surprised." Rosa's voice grew sad. They had a terrible falling out about 5 years ago. Derek tried to intervene when he thought Milena was taking advantage of her grandmother financially. Milena accused him of being jealous and cut him off completely. She even convinced Ronan that Derek was trying to manipulate the family. My pulse quickened. What happened exactly? Derek noticed that Milena was using her grandmother's credit cards without permission, supposedly for emergencies that never seemed to be real emergencies. When he confronted her, she claimed the old woman had given her permission, but Derek had been caring for his grandmother and knew she was starting to show signs of dementia. I gripped the phone tighter. What did Derek do? He reported it to Adult Protective Services. Milena was furious, not because she was innocent, but because Derek had embarrassed the family. She told everyone that Derek was trying to steal the grandmother's affection and money for himself. And what was the truth? Rosa sighed deeply. Derek was protecting his grandmother. He'd been paying for her medications out of his own salary because Milena had maxed out the old woman's credit cards. When grandmother died 6 months later, Milena inherited everything, about $80,000. Derek got nothing, which is exactly what he expected. He never wanted the money. He just wanted his grandmother treated with dignity. I sat in stunned silence, absorbing this information. Derek sounded like everything Ronan wasn't: selfless, protective of the elderly, unwilling to exploit vulnerable family members. Does Derek know about Ronan and Milena's current situation? I asked. I doubt it. Derek doesn't ask about Milena anymore. It hurt him too much when she turned the whole family against him. He focuses on his work now. He's a cardiac nurse at Mercy General. Wonderful with elderly patients, from what I hear. After I hung up, I sat in my living room as pieces of a plan began forming in my mind. Derek Vasquez wasn't just a suitable beneficiary. He was perfect. Milena's own half-brother, the man she'd painted as a villain while she was actually the one exploiting elderly family members. The irony was beautiful. But I needed to meet Derek first, to confirm that Rosa's assessment was accurate. I couldn't base a $2 million decision on secondhand information, no matter how compelling. The next morning, I called Mercy General and asked to speak with Derek Vasquez. When he came to the phone, his voice was gentle but professional. This is Derek. How can I help you? Mr. Vasquez, this is Lillian Crawford. I'm calling about your grandmother, Maria Vasquez. There was a long pause. My grandmother passed away 5 years ago. Are you from the hospital? No, this is difficult to explain over the phone. Would you be willing to meet with me? I knew Maria through my work with the church auxiliary. The lie came easily, but it served my purpose. Derek agreed to meet me for coffee after his shift ended at 7 o'clock. I spent the day researching everything I could find about him online. His nursing license was current and clean. He'd received commendations from the hospital for his patient care. There were no criminal records, no financial troubles, nothing to suggest he was anything other than what Rosa had described. At exactly 7:15, Derek walked into the coffee shop we'd agreed on. Up close, the family resemblance to Milena was even stronger, but where her beauty felt calculated and artificial, his features held warmth and genuine kindness. Mrs. Crawford? He approached my table with a slightly nervous smile. I have to admit, I'm curious about this meeting. I don't remember my grandmother mentioning your name. I'd prepared for this question. Actually, Derek, I wasn't entirely truthful on the phone. I didn't know Maria personally, but I know your sister Milena very well. She's my daughter-in-law. Derek's expression shifted, becoming guarded. I see. What does this have to do with my grandmother? I've recently learned some things about what happened during Maria's final years. Your mother Rosa told me about your concerns regarding Milena's financial arrangements with Maria. Derek stared at his coffee cup, his jaw tightening slightly. That's ancient history, Mrs. Crawford. Why bring it up now? Because I'm beginning to understand that the same patterns might be repeating themselves. I chose my words carefully, watching his reaction. With someone else's elderly family member. Derek looked up sharply. Are you in some kind of trouble? His immediate concern for my welfare told me everything I needed to know about his character. Not trouble exactly, but I've discovered some things that concern me. Derek, can you tell me exactly what happened with Maria? I need to understand the full situation. Derek was quiet for a long moment, then began speaking in measured tones. My grandmother started showing signs of memory issues about 6 years ago. Nothing dramatic, just forgetting conversations, repeating stories. Milena began spending more time with her, which I thought was wonderful at first. He paused, his fingers turning his coffee cup slowly. Then I noticed grandmother was running out of money faster than usual. Her Social Security covered her basic expenses, but suddenly she couldn't afford her heart medication. When I offered to help, grandmother said Milena was already helping with money. But that wasn't true? Milena was helping herself to money. She'd convinced grandmother to add her name to the checking account for emergencies. Then she used grandmother's credit cards for her own shopping trips, restaurant bills, even car payments. When grandmother got confused about the charges, Milena would tell her she'd forgotten giving permission. My stomach turned. This was exactly what I suspected Milena might be planning for me. When I confronted Milena, she said grandmother had insisted on helping her financially, that it made the old woman feel useful. But Mrs. Crawford, my grandmother was living on crackers and soup because she couldn't afford groceries. That's not someone who's freely giving away money for car payments. Derek's voice carried years of suppressed anger and grief. I reported it to Adult Protective Services, and they investigated. But by then, Milena had convinced grandmother that Derek was the problem, that I was jealous and trying to steal her money. Grandmother defended Milena right up until the end. And your family's reaction? Milena told everyone I was trying to manipulate a dying old woman for money. She painted me as the greedy one while she was literally stealing from someone with dementia. My own mother believed her version for months. Derek met my eyes directly. Mrs. Crawford, if Milena is your daughter-in-law, you need to be very, very careful. She's incredibly skilled at manipulation, and she specifically targets elderly people who might be vulnerable. I reached across the table and squeezed Derek's hand. Thank you for telling me this. You've confirmed something I desperately needed to know. As we parted ways that evening, I knew I'd found my answer. Derek Vasquez wasn't just the perfect person to inherit my money. He was exactly the kind of person who would use it honorably. And leaving everything to Milena's despised half-brother would be a lesson she and Ronan would never forget. The next morning, I called Margaret Morrison with my decision. Derek Vasquez will be your sole beneficiary? Margaret Morrison looked up from her legal pad, pen poised in midair. I want to make sure I understand this correctly, Lillian. You're leaving your entire estate to your daughter-in-law's half-brother, with whom she has no relationship? I nodded firmly. That's exactly right. And you're certain this isn't a decision made in anger? These choices should be carefully considered. I'd expected this question. Margaret was doing her job, protecting me from potentially rash decisions. But this wasn't rash. It was calculated justice. Margaret, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Derek Vasquez is a good man who was wrongly vilified by his own family for trying to protect an elderly relative from financial abuse. My son and daughter-in-law have made it clear they're only interested in my death for what they can gain from it. I want my legacy to go to someone who understands the value of protecting vulnerable people. Margaret made careful notes. Very well. I'll draft the new will immediately. But Lillian, given the unusual nature of this bequest, I strongly recommend that we include a detailed explanation of your reasoning. It will make the document much harder to contest. Perfect. I want them to understand exactly why I made this choice. We spent the next 2 hours crafting not just a legal document, but a message. Margaret helped me structure my reasoning in language that would be legally sound while still delivering the emotional impact I wanted. There's one more thing, I said as our meeting concluded. I want to ensure that Ronan doesn't discover these changes until after my death. Is there a way to guarantee that? Margaret considered this. We'll file the new will with the court under seal, and I'll be the only attorney with access until probate begins. But Lillian, your son could potentially try to have you declared incompetent if he suspects you've made changes. Do you have any concerns about that? The thought had occurred to me. Ronan's recent interest in my medical records suggested he might be building a case for cognitive decline. Actually, yes. I'd like to take steps to document my mental competency. Margaret arranged for me to undergo a comprehensive psychological evaluation with Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in elder care assessments. 3 days later, I sat in Dr. Chen's office answering detailed questions about my memory, decision-making abilities, and understanding of financial matters. "Mrs. Crawford, your cognitive function is excellent," Dr. Chen informed me after 2 hours of testing. "Your memory is sharp, your reasoning skills are well above average for your age group, and you demonstrate clear understanding of complex financial decisions. I'll prepare a detailed report documenting your mental competency." With that safeguard in place, I returned to Margaret's office to sign the final documents. As I wrote my name on the new will, I felt a satisfaction I hadn't experienced since Harold's death. "Now comes the difficult part," Margaret warned me. "You'll need to act normally around your son and daughter-in-law. Any sudden changes in behavior might make them suspicious." That evening, as if summoned by fate, Ronan called. "Mom, Milena and I were thinking about taking you to dinner this weekend. Somewhere nice. Maybe that Italian place you used to love." The restaurant he mentioned was expensive, the kind of place we'd celebrated special occasions when Harold was alive. I wondered if this sudden generosity was motivated by guilt, or if they were simply trying to keep me happy while they waited for my death. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart." "Great. Saturday night, 7 o'clock. And Mom, I've been thinking about what you said about updating your will. If you need any help with that, or if you want me to come with you to the lawyer's office, I'm happy to help." There it was. He couldn't resist probing. "Thank you, Ronan, but I've already handled it. Everything is exactly the way it should be." The truth of that statement made me smile. Saturday evening, I dressed carefully for dinner, choosing the navy blue dress Harold had always complimented. When Ronan and Milena arrived to pick me up, they were both unusually attentive. "You look beautiful tonight, Mom," Ronan said, helping me into their car. "Absolutely elegant," Milena agreed. "That color is perfect on you." At the restaurant, they ordered an expensive bottle of wine and encouraged me to try the most costly items on the menu. Ronan kept the conversation light, asking about my garden, my book club, my weekly bridge game with the neighbors. But I could feel their attention like a physical weight, as if they were studying me for signs of decline. "How are you sleeping lately, Mom?" Milena asked during the main course. "I know grief can affect sleep patterns." "I'm sleeping wonderfully, thank you. In fact, I feel more energetic than I have in months." Something flickered across both their faces. Disappointment, perhaps, or frustration. "That's wonderful," Ronan said, but his smile seemed forced. "Though at your age it's important to take things easy. No unnecessary stress or big decisions." I nearly laughed. "Oh, I agree completely. That's why I made sure to handle all my important business quickly and efficiently. Everything is settled exactly as it should be." After dinner, as Ronan drove me home, Milena turned in her seat to face me. "Lillian, I hope you know how much we care about you. With Harold gone, Ronan and I want you to feel secure and loved. We're here for whatever you need." "That's so thoughtful, Milena. It means everything to know that family looks out for each other." I watched her face in the reflection of the passenger window. She looked satisfied, as if my response confirmed something she'd been hoping to hear. The following week brought a series of increasingly frequent visits. Ronan stopped by Tuesday evening with takeout from my favorite Chinese restaurant. Milena arrived Thursday afternoon with fresh flowers and stayed for tea. They called every day, sometimes twice, checking on my health, my mood, my plans. They were monitoring me, but I was monitoring them too. During Milena's Thursday visit, I excused myself to use the bathroom and observed her from the hallway. She was photographing items in my living room with her phone. Harold's watch collection, the antique vase from our honeymoon, even the silver tea service we'd inherited from my mother. She was creating an inventory of her expected inheritance. That night, I called Derek Vasquez. "Mrs. Crawford, is everything all right?" "I'm fine, Derek, but I wanted to ask you something. If you suddenly inherited a significant amount of money, what would you do with it?" Derek was quiet for a moment. "That's an unusual question. Is this hypothetical?" "Humor me." Well, I suppose I'd pay off my student loans first. Maybe buy a small house instead of renting. But honestly, Mrs. Crawford, the thing I think about most is how inadequate our resources are for elderly patients who don't have family support. I see so many people who are alone, scared, struggling with medical bills they can't afford. What would help them most? Practical things. Transportation to medical appointments, someone to help with grocery shopping, assistance with insurance paperwork, maybe funding for a program that pairs volunteers with isolated seniors. Nothing glamorous, just basic human dignity. I smiled, knowing I'd made the right choice. Derek, I need to tell you something important, but I need your word that you'll keep this conversation completely confidential. Of course. I explained everything. Ronan and Milena's conversations about my death, their financial planning based on my inheritance, my decision to change my will in his favor. Derek was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Mrs. Crawford, I can't accept this. It's too much, and I'm not even really family. Derek, you're more family to me than the people who share my blood. You protected your grandmother when she couldn't protect herself. You dedicate your life to caring for vulnerable people. If anyone deserves to benefit from a lifetime of careful saving, it's someone who will use that money to honor the values that earned it. But Milena, she'll be devastated, furious. Yes, she will. And that's exactly why this is so important. Derek, they're literally waiting for me to die so they can claim money I've spent 40 years accumulating. They discuss my death like a business transaction. Don't you think that deserves consequences? When Derek finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. What you're describing. It's exactly what happened with my grandmother. Milena convinced her that taking her money was normal, that she owed it to family. I tried to protect grandmother, and Milena made me the villain. And now you'll have the chance to help other elderly people who are in the same situation your grandmother was in. Derek agreed to keep my secret, though I could hear the shock in his voice. After we hung up, I felt a profound sense of peace. Everything was in place. My will was updated and legally bulletproof, my mental competency was documented, and the perfect beneficiary was chosen. Now all I had to do was wait for the natural course of life to unfold while Ronan and Milena continued their vigil, counting days until they could claim their reward. But the reward was about to go to someone who would actually deserve it. The next 3 months passed like a carefully choreographed dance. Ronan and Milena increased their visits, always arriving with small gifts and concerned expressions. I played my part perfectly, accepting their attention while secretly documenting every manipulation attempt. Mom, you seem a little confused today, Ronan said during one October visit, after I'd deliberately mixed up the days of the week. Are you sure you're taking your medications correctly? I blinked innocently. Oh dear, am I? The days do seem to run together sometimes. Milena exchanged a meaningful glance with Ronan. Maybe we should organize your pills into one of those weekly containers. Make sure you don't accidentally take too many or too few. They wanted me to appear more fragile, more dependent. It would make their eventual inheritance claim seem more justified, and it would provide evidence of declining competency if anyone questioned their right to my money. I agreed to the pill organizer, though I continued taking my medications exactly as prescribed. Doctor. Peterson had been thrilled with my recent checkups. My blood pressure was well controlled, my heart was strong, and my cognitive function remained excellent. But I didn't share these positive reports with Ronan and Milena. Instead, I fed them carefully crafted concerns. I've been having trouble remembering things lately, I told Milena during one of her Thursday afternoon tea visits. Yesterday, I couldn't recall Harold's middle name for several minutes. It frightened me. Milena's eyes lit up with poorly concealed excitement. Oh, Lillian, that must be so scary. Have you talked to Dr. Peterson about it? I'm thinking about it. But I worry about what he might say. What if it's something serious? You shouldn't wait, Milena urged. Early intervention is so important with these kinds of issues. These kinds of issues. She couldn't even say the word dementia, but I could see her mind working, calculating how much sooner her inheritance might arrive if I developed cognitive problems. During this same period, I was making my own preparations. I updated my address book, organizing contact information for people who should be notified after my death. I wrote letters to old friends, sharing memories and expressing gratitude for their friendship over the years. I arranged for my house to be appraised and organized all my important documents in clearly labeled files. Most importantly, I spent time with Derek Vasquez. We met monthly for coffee, and I came to appreciate what a genuinely decent man he was. Derek never asked about the inheritance I'd promised him, never pushed for details about my arrangements. Instead, he talked about his work, his patience, his hopes of starting a small nonprofit organization to help elderly people navigate the healthcare system. I see so many people who are overwhelmed by insurance forms and medication schedules, he told me during our November meeting. They need advocates, people who understand the system and can help them maintain their independence safely. That sounds like important work, I said. It is, but it requires funding to do it properly. Volunteers need training, transportation, basic supplies. I've been saving money towards starting something like that, but on a nurse's salary, it's slow going. I smiled, imagining how Derek's dream could become reality with the inheritance he didn't know was coming. That same week, Ronan invited me to Thanksgiving dinner at their house, the first holiday invitation I'd received from them in 3 years. "We want this to be a special family celebration," Milena said when she called to confirm my attendance. "Just the 5 of us, you, Ronan, Emma, and me. Very intimate and cozy." The number bothered me until I realized she was counting herself twice, or perhaps she was already mentally excluding me from the family count. Thanksgiving morning, I dressed in my best burgundy dress and drove to their house in the upscale neighborhood that Ronan's first marriage settlement had helped him afford. The house was beautiful. Modern kitchen, expensive furniture, perfectly landscaped yard. All funded by my financial support over the years. Emma answered the door, looking lovely in a cream-colored sweater. At 20 years old, she had her father's height and her mother's delicate features, but her warmth was entirely her own. "Grandma Lillian, I'm so glad you're here," she said, embracing me genuinely. "I have so much to tell you about school." As Emma led me into the living room, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. On the mantelpiece, carefully arranged among family photos, were several pictures I'd never seen before. Photos of Harold and me from our younger years, including our wedding picture, and one from our 25th anniversary. They were displaying our photos like we were already part of their family history instead of their present reality. "Where did you get these pictures?" I asked Milena, trying to keep my voice light. "Oh, Ronan found them in Harold's study when he was helping you organize a few weeks ago. I thought they looked so beautiful up there, honoring your marriage. I hadn't asked Ronan to help me organize anything. He'd been going through Harold's study without my permission, taking whatever he wanted." During dinner, the conversation felt surreal. They asked about my health, my social activities, my plans for the winter months. But underneath their concern, I sensed something else: impatience. They were tired of waiting for nature to take its course. "Mom, I've been thinking," Ronan said as Milena served dessert. "Maybe you should consider moving to one of those senior living communities. The one over on Maple Street is supposed to be very nice. You'd have people around all the time, medical care readily available." I nearly choked on my pumpkin pie. "Ronan, I'm only 66 years old, and I'm perfectly capable of living independently." "Of course you are," Milena said quickly. "But think about the peace of mind. If something happened, help would be right there." "And you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining that big house," Ronan added. "The property taxes alone must be a burden." There it was. They wanted me out of the house so they could sell it sooner, turn the asset into liquid cash they could access immediately upon my death. "I love my house," I said firmly. "Harold and I made that our home for 38 years. I'm not ready to leave it." Emma looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "Grandma, you seem really happy and healthy to me. Why would you need to move?" Ronan shot his daughter a sharp look. "Emma, sometimes adults have to make practical decisions about the future." "But Grandma doesn't seem like she needs to make those kinds of decisions yet," Emma persisted. "You're always telling me not to rush into big life changes." I squeezed Emma's hand under the table, grateful for her unwitting support. After dinner, as I prepared to leave, Ronan walked me to my car. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with something, his face showing an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Mom, I want you to know that I do love you. I know I haven't always been the best son, especially since Dad died. I should have been more supportive during your grief." For a split second, my heart softened. This was the opening I'd been hoping for, the chance for genuine connection with my son. "I love you too, Ronan. And I forgive you for not being perfect. None of us are." He nodded, seeming relieved. Then he continued. "That's why I want to make sure you're taken care of properly, that your assets are protected and managed well. I've been doing some research about estate planning, and there are some strategies that could be really beneficial." My moment of hope crumbled. Even his declaration of love was a setup for financial manipulation. "What kind of strategies?" I asked, though I already knew where this was heading. "Well, if you transferred ownership of certain assets to me now, while you're still alive, we could avoid probate complications later. It would make everything much simpler for everyone involved." He wanted me to sign over my property before I died, eliminating any chance that I might change my mind about my inheritance plans. "That's thoughtful, sweetheart, but my lawyer has assured me that my estate planning is exactly where it needs to be." Ronan's expression shifted slightly, frustration flickering across his features. "Mom, sometimes these lawyers don't explain all the options. Maybe I could come with you to your next appointment, just to make sure you're getting the best advice." "That won't be necessary. I trust Margaret Morrison completely." As I drove home that night, I felt the weight of finality settling over me. I'd given Ronan one last chance to connect with me as his mother rather than his financial opportunity, and he'd failed spectacularly. The next morning, I called Margaret Morrison. "I want to add one more provision to my will," I told her. "I want to include a recording." "A recording?" "I want to record a message explaining my decisions, to be played when the will is read. Something personal that makes my intentions absolutely clear." Margaret arranged for me to record my message at her office that afternoon. Sitting in front of a small digital recorder, I spoke the words I'd been rehearsing for months. "My name is Lillian Crawford, and I am recording this message on November 26th, 2023, in the presence of my attorney, Margaret Morrison. I am 66 years old, and I am of sound mind and body. To my son Ronan, if you are hearing this message, it means I have died, and you are learning that you will not inherit my estate. I want you to understand why I made this decision. On October 15th, I overheard you and Milena discussing my death as if it were a business opportunity. You calculated my worth at $2 million and expressed impatience about my continued good health. You said I was too old to change anything, suggesting that you believed my mental faculties were declining. You were wrong about my mental state, but you were right about one thing. I was old enough to change everything. I have left my entire estate to Derek Vasquez, Milena's half-brother, because he represents everything you failed to be. Where you saw me as a burden waiting to die, Derek dedicates his life to protecting and caring for elderly people. Where you plan to spend my money on luxuries, Derek will use it to help others maintain their dignity in their final years. I hope this decision teaches you both something about the consequences of treating family members as financial assets, rather than human beings deserving of love and respect. This is my final gift to you, Ronan, the gift of understanding that actions have consequences, and that a parent's love is not unconditional when that condition is greed. As I finished recording, I felt a profound sense of completion. Everything was in place now. My will was filed, my message recorded, my beneficiary chosen. All that remained was for life to run its natural course while Ronan and Milena continued their death watch, never suspecting that their vigil would end in devastating disappointment. I lived for 2 more years after making those recordings, 2 years of watching Ronan and Milena's increasingly desperate attempts to monitor my decline. They suggested more medical appointments, pushed for additional testing, and even hired a housekeeper to help with the burden of maintaining such a large home. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, was actually a lovely woman who became genuinely fond of me. But I could see Milena's instructions in her careful attention to my daily routines, her subtle questions about my memory and confusion levels. They were building a case for my incompetency, documenting every small slip or moment of forgetfulness. I disappointed them by remaining stubbornly healthy and sharp. In my final months, I developed a lung infection that progressed to pneumonia. At 68, it was serious, but not unexpected. Dr. Peterson was optimistic about my recovery, but I could see the hope in Ronan's eyes during his daily hospital visits. "Don't worry about anything at home, Mom," he said, holding my hand with what might have seemed like genuine affection to outside observers. "Milena and I are taking care of everything." I knew exactly what they were taking care of. They had keys to my house now, ostensibly for emergencies. I imagined them walking through the rooms, making mental lists, perhaps even measuring furniture to see what would fit in their own home. Emma visited every day, bringing flowers and books, sitting beside my bed to read aloud when I was too tired to hold a conversation. She was the one bright spot in those final weeks, proof that goodness could emerge even from Ronan's failed parenting. "Grandma," she said during one visit, "I want you to know that no matter what happens, I'll always remember how kind you were to me. You made me feel loved even when my parents were too busy fighting to notice me." I squeezed her hand, wishing I could tell her about the trust fund I'd established for her education, a separate provision that wouldn't be revealed until she graduated college. Emma would be provided for, but Derek would receive the bulk of my estate. On a quiet Tuesday morning in March, I passed peacefully in my sleep. The nurse found me with a small smile on my face, clutching the photo of Harold I kept on my nightstand. The funeral was held 3 days later at St. Matthew's, the church where Harold and I had been married 45 years earlier. The service was beautiful. Emma had chosen readings that truly reflected my life and values, while Ronan delivered a eulogy that painted him as a devoted son who would miss his mother's wisdom and guidance. If only he had sought that guidance while I was alive to give it. After the service, Margaret Morrison approached Ronan and Milena as they greeted mourners in the church lobby. "Mr. Crawford, Mrs. Crawford, I'd like to schedule a time to read your mother's will. Are you available tomorrow afternoon?" Ronan's eyes lit up with barely concealed excitement. "Of course, we'll make ourselves available whenever convenient." "Excellent. 2 o'clock at my office. And please bring Emma. She's mentioned in the will as well." That evening, from whatever realm I now inhabited, I watched Ronan and Milena's celebration. They had moved into my house temporarily, they told friends, to handle estate matters. But they were already rearranging furniture, packing away my personal items, discussing renovation plans. $2 million, Milena said, pouring expensive wine into my good crystal glasses. "We can finally pay off the mortgage, remodel this entire place, and still have enough left for Emma's education and our retirement. Mom would be happy knowing her money was helping family," Ronan replied, though he'd never once asked about my wishes while I was alive to express them. They went to bed that night in my bedroom, lying on sheets I'd washed and ironed, surrounded by furniture Harold and I had chosen together. Milena fell asleep planning her new kitchen. Ronan dreamed of golf vacations and early retirement. At exactly 2 o'clock the next afternoon, they arrived at Morrison & Associates, dressed in appropriately somber clothing, but unable to hide their anticipation. Emma accompanied them reluctantly, still red-eyed from genuine grief. Margaret Morrison's conference room was set up with a small audio system alongside the traditional paperwork. 4 chairs were arranged around the polished table, with a 5th chair conspicuously empty. "Before we begin," Margaret said, "I should mention that we're expecting one more person. Derek Vasquez should be arriving momentarily." Ronan frowned. "Derek Vasquez? I don't know anyone by that name." Milena went very still. "Why would Derek be here?" "He's mentioned in the will," Margaret replied simply. At that moment, Derek entered the conference room, wearing a dark suit and carrying a small bouquet of white roses, the same flowers I'd grown in my garden every year. He looked nervous but dignified, nodding politely to everyone present. "Hello, Milena," he said quietly. Milena's face went white. What is he doing here? She demanded, turning to Ronan. This is family business. He has no right to be here. Actually, he has every right, Margaret interrupted. Please, everyone take a seat. We have quite a bit to cover. Margaret began reading my will aloud, starting with the standard legal language, then moving to the specific bequests. Emma was to receive $50,000 in a trust fund for her education, available when she graduated college. The remainder of my estate, Margaret read, including all bank accounts, investment portfolios, real estate, personal property, and life insurance benefits, totaling approximately $2,150,000, I leave entirely to Derek Vasquez. The silence in the room was deafening. Ronan's mouth fell open. Milena let out a sound like a wounded animal. Emma looked confused, glancing between her father and the stranger who had just inherited her grandmother's fortune. There must be a mistake, Ronan said, his voice shaking. My mother wouldn't. She couldn't have. There's no mistake, Margaret replied. But there is more. Mrs. Crawford left a recorded message explaining her decision. Would you like me to play it? Ronan nodded numbly, still in shock. My voice filled the room, clear and strong, explaining exactly why I had made my choice. As the recording played, I watched their faces change, Ronan's shock turning to horror as he recognized his own words quoted back to him, Milena's fury building as she realized the magnitude of her loss. When the recording ended, the silence was broken by Milena's scream of rage. This is insane. She was senile, manipulated. Derek somehow convinced her to change her will. We'll contest this. We'll prove she wasn't competent. Margaret calmly produced my psychological evaluation from Dr. Chen, the documentation of my excellent mental state right up until my death. Mrs. Crawford anticipated this reaction, she said. She wanted to be absolutely certain her wishes were carried out. Ronan finally found his voice. But I'm her son, her only child. How could she do this? Derek spoke for the first time since the reading began. She did it because you treated her like a bank account instead of a human being. I heard about your conversations, Ronan, about how you monitored her health, hoped for her death, planned her funeral before she was even sick. You poisoned her against us, Milena accused, her voice shrill with desperation. You manipulated a grieving old woman. I met your stepmother exactly 4 times before she died, Derek replied calmly. She sought me out, not the other way around. And she made this decision because she knew I would use her gift to help people instead of buying golf memberships and kitchen renovations. Emma, who had been silent throughout the revelation, suddenly spoke up. Dad, is it true? Did you really say those things about Grandma? Ronan couldn't meet his daughter's eyes. Emma, you don't understand. We were struggling financially, and you thought it was okay to wish for her death? Emma's voice was sharp with disgust. Grandma was always kind to me. She never treated me like a burden or an obligation. I can't believe you talked about her that way. Emma stood up abruptly. I don't want any part of this, and I don't want money that you thought you were getting from hoping Grandma would die. She walked out of the conference room, leaving Ronan calling after her helplessly. In the weeks that followed, Ronan and Milena did attempt to contest the will, hiring an expensive attorney they couldn't afford. But my planning had been too thorough, my documentation too complete. The will stood exactly as I had written it. They were forced to move out of my house, which Derek decided to sell rather than keep. The proceeds went towards starting the non-profit organization he had described to me, the Dignity Project, dedicated to helping elderly people navigate healthcare systems and avoid financial exploitation. Milena's relationship with Derek never recovered, though Rosa, their mother, was quietly pleased that her son had finally received recognition for his good character. The family dynamics Milena had manipulated for years shifted permanently. Ronan's marriage didn't survive the financial devastation or the revelation of his character. Faced with debt and no inheritance to bail them out, Milena filed for divorce within 6 months, taking half of what little they had left. Emma changed her major to social work and eventually joined Derek's organization as a volunteer coordinator. She never spoke to her father about the inheritance, but she sent Derek a letter thanking him for honoring my memory through his work. Derek established the Lillian Crawford Fund within his nonprofit, specifically focused on preventing financial abuse of elderly family members. The program provides legal advocacy, financial counseling, and support groups for seniors who suspect they're being exploited by relatives. From wherever I now exist, I watch Derek's work with profound satisfaction. My money helps elderly people maintain their dignity and independence. It protects vulnerable seniors from the kind of exploitation Milena practiced and Ronan enabled. Most importantly, it serves as a permanent reminder that love cannot be inherited, only earned, and that sometimes the most powerful act of love is ensuring that justice is served, even when we're no longer there to see it. Ronan learned too late that his mother was never too old to change everything. And in changing everything, I had found the perfect way to honor Harold's memory and my own values while teaching the most important lesson of all, that greed destroys families, but integrity builds legacies that last forever. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.